Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm your host, Sam Chase, and with us this evening is candidate for state representative position running in the September 6th primary, Vivian Birchall. And I pronounced that correctly, didn't I?
Yes, you did, Mr.
I practiced. So, I mean, the worst thing is to mispronounce people's names, and I'm pretty good at mispronouncing people's names. So, but anyway, we're glad to have you here, Vivian. This is your second appearance here, talking to the voters of the district. And before we get started, let me just situate the audience a little bit to explain which district we're talking about. So as a result of the 2020 census, the state representative and senatorial district lines were redrawn, and what used to be, for Chelmsford voters anyway, what used to be precinct 1 and 9 were in that old legislative district. So the new district that you're going to be running in comprises precincts 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 in Chelmsford, the entire town of Carlisle, precincts 1, 2, and 5 in Concord, and 1, 2, 6, and 7 in Acton. So that's a pretty decent geographical distribution. And the district has roughly 45,500 or so people, and that's pretty much the population number that is required for a legislative district. So that is the district that you're trying for. And having said that, now I'd like to have you give us a little bit of insight as to your background.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chase. It's exciting to be here with you again today. Thanks for that intro of the redistricting. To the viewers, my name is Vivian Birchall, but on the ballot it will be Vivian Birchall. I live in Acton. I have 2 children, 7 and 10, in our public schools. And I'm a co-operator for Emerson Hospital, which gives me an insight into our education, our healthcare needs, both on the provider's side and we the consumers. So understanding those challenges is going to be critical in passing legislation that will impact the way, improve our healthcare access in this community. I'm also a telemedia person. I work with Acton TV full-time, just sharing information in our community about our local governments, about our local nonprofits, the services they provide in our communities in and around, in the 14th Middlesex to be precise, and also issues happening in our state and country. But also I am on the board of our local Acton-Boxborough United Way that provides services to people in our communities, in mental health services, food security, and literacy, financial education and literacy as well. So I am deeply committed to improving the lives of everyone in this community. But also I worked for the town of Acton in the Land Use and Economic Development Department. So that's the planning department, building department. So I have firsthand experience, understanding some of the challenges that get into buildings and zoning in our towns, and possibly we'll have the experience to, come up with legislation that will help ease the housing situation in our community, both for the service providers or the contractors who also have to go through these regulations. But also, one of the things that I thrive at is building people together, because as a host like yourself, I bring people together to just identify and profile issues in our community. And that is something that we need in our legislature, because the issues keep changing every time. We might come today campaigning on 4 or 5 issues, and then tomorrow we have another crisis. So the ability to bring people together is something that I one of my strengths. And prior to coming to, of course, you can tell from my accent, I'm not from here. That is, again, something different from the other candidates. And I thrive in that because it means that I have a very wide experience and a perspective when I'm looking at issues. I worked in government in different places, First in my home country, Uganda, where I first worked with the legislative body, bringing legislators together to pass transparency and anti-corruption legislation, and then went on transition to work for the National Planning Authority, which was charged with creating the country's comprehensive plans, but integrating governance into that, because economic development and community development cannot happen if governance is poor. So I bring all this experience into this office. I have the ability to identify priorities, integrate them in sector plans, bring collaborators, implementers, and everyone together so that we can create, and when I look at the district, for example, it's the 14th Middlesex is going to have 4 towns. So we're going to have to work on regional projects together, transportation, housing, name it. And so this is a skill, this is something, an environment that I have worked in and thrived, and I'm happy to extend these skills into my work as a legislator, and among other things. So we'll start there. There is more experience to share with you, but
obviously, yes. but you've given an excellent comprehensive summary of your background, and it's absolutely true. You do have experience that other candidates don't have, and the international experience, I think, is directly applicable in the fact that you've actually had legislative experience at a level above a municipal level, okay? I think that's very important. So you bring that to the table. So you certainly appear to be very well credentialed, to take on this responsibility.
Thank you, Sam.
I'm going to ask you a very general question because I think it's important. People want to know why it is that you are running at this time. What is motivating you to seek this office? I think you may have answered a little bit of that question already, but if you could expand on that, I think it would be helpful to the voters.
So thank you for that wonderful question. So like I've mentioned before, I am deeply into the community, trying to solve problems, even before I thought of running for office, whether as a volunteer with the organizations within our community, or as a town employee, or as a TV host and producer, because I started hosting this on Acton TV in 2017. Mm-hmm. So through this experience, I have heard from people about the issues that sometimes do not come to the front line, whether it's because of the stigma attached to them, mental health, or food insecurity, or just struggle integrating in these new communities, the local businesses struggling during the pandemic. So I felt that I have what it takes to make a difference because of that ability to listen and understand the pain that our community is going through. Yes, we live in a suburban, this 14th Middlesex District is projected to be great and well-funded, but sometimes the problems that hurt our community are behind closed doors. Some of them are within the local governments that they don't really come out in the public. And because I've paid attention to that, I am so committed to making the difference, that to bring my expertise and experience from my work over the years to make a difference, because I truly believe that it takes somebody with my experience, with someone who can look at issues in a different with so many lenses, who has lived experiences of some of the issues we're trying to solve, because it's easy to sit in the state legislature and point out, these lived experiences and improve our legislation so that we can all see ourselves in it.
I think that's an excellent answer, and you've provided wonderful context. And and I think one of the things that turns people off generally about politicians is the notion that you watch these folks on TV and you say, guy has no idea what I have to go through every day just to keep my head above water. I look at, especially on the national level, I look at candidates and I say, when's the last time this guy had to worry about making his mortgage payment? Or when's the last time he had to shovel his own snow, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't afford to hire somebody to do it for him? When's the last time that he had to make a tuition payment so there's a disconnect, I think, between the general population and what I call the political ruling class or the political elite. And it seems to me somebody with your background is in a very good position to be able to bridge that process and that thought process, because because of your lived experiences, as you said. I think it's very important, to have people like yourself representing us politically, because you are able better to relate to, for lack of a better term, the average person, shall we say.
Absolutely.
And it's very hard, I think, once you get into office and you stay there for a while, it's hard to keep that connection with the constituency. So that kind of brings me into another area that and we talked about this the last time you were here, but you know how I feel about this sort of thing, so I'm going to ask the question. You're running as a Democrat, so assuming you get elected, and of course the state legislature is overwhelmingly Democratic. I don't know, what have you got, 20 Republicans in the House and 4 or 5 in the Senate or something like that. It's almost not even worth talking about. However, that being said, and I do know other folks that are in the legislature, just because they all have the D after their name doesn't all mean that they're of the same total political persuasion. So you have people that are very progressive, you have people that are less progressive. So there is some conservatism among some of your Democratic colleagues in the legislature. And then, of course, you've got the Republicans. So you're going to find yourself in a position of having to work with people that may not completely share your political philosophy. So how do you address that? How do you get stuff done when you have to work with colleagues that may not be of the same mind that you are on certain issues?
Mr. Chase, you bring up a very important question, and this is where my experience comes in very handy, and I'll tell you why. So as a priority, solving people's needs is going to be a priority of mine, because if we are struggling with healthcare access, I talk to seniors, they're struggling with healthcare. I talk to, different populations, and healthcare is broad. So some it's insurance, others it's accessibility in terms of money, they can't afford certain drug prescriptions. So as a Democrat who is running to make healthcare right, I will be interested in capping the cost of prescribed drug. And I think that crosses party lines, among other things. Housing crisis, that crosses party lines. We all need housing. And so this is how I'm looking at this. And my background, so I told you I worked in the legislative body in Uganda. So what I did not mention to you is that at the time I joined, the country was under one political system that focused on individual merit of the legislators. And then during my time there, the country transitioned from a one-party system to a multi-party system. And part of what I did with some legislators was to talk to the population and hear their concerns about multi-party politics and how it would affect service delivery, and integrated those concerns into making sure that we have buffers for that to happen. And we transitioned when I was there. So I have worked in a system, in a legislative system, where people from different political parties sit together to pass legislation that will improve the lives of people. So it's not something new. It is, I've seen it, I've been part of a process, and it has worked, and I'm ready. I bring with me this same work culture into this state house, knowing that at the end of the day, the focus should be on the quality of life of the people and not the parties we belong to.
Very good. That's just a point of interest. How many political parties did you have to deal with once that transition was made in Uganda? It was more than 2.
It was more than 2, but then the very active ones were 2. Usually there is the majority parties, or the ones that have more people, and then the smaller ones that usually don't have a significant number of people.
But that must have been a very interesting dynamic. People that were in the legislature, they were used to, one line, one way of going forward, and then all of a sudden, as a result of the political change in the country, they found themselves, well, gee, now I actually have to deal with people that maybe they don't think the same way I do on certain issues. And so you were able to bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
Successfully, yeah.
And
that is absolutely, to me, that's a top priority of any legislator. I look at some of the folks that have been in the legislature for many, many years, and they look at absolutely everything through their political lens. and it does not serve the people well. And that is, I am criticizing both sides equally, both the Democrats and the Republicans. I see that approach, and it doesn't work. And I have confidence in just talking to you and listening to what you have to say based on your philosophy. I think that if you are elected, I think you will be successful in bridging some of those gaps and
Absolutely.
trying to bring, be solution focused, and I think that's very important. So,
Absolutely. And also my work actually on telemedia, I host people from all the political parties.
what's the name of your show?
I have a number of shows.
You have more than one show. That's all I can do to do the one show.
All right, so I have Acton in Focus that focuses on issues in and around the Acton area. Whitefield that broadens the scope to the state, in our district and our state and country. Then I have recently I launched Healthcare Blind Spots because of my passion for healthcare. I forgot to mention my mother was a nurse.
Oh, okay.
So I have seen the healthcare workers, work so hard, oftentimes undervalued. They spend so many hours serving us, and actually my commitment is to support the healthcare workers. And the pandemic has put a strain on the healthcare system. I want to be there for you. As a cooperator for Emerson, I also understand the challenges with mental health. Right now, we have a mental health crisis in our beautiful towns. And Emerson Hospital, when I was chatting with our cooperator, she's like the director, I got to know that there are 0 pediatric beds, 0,
At
that
Emerson?
are licensed for Emerson. And Emerson serves most of us.
That surprises me.
Right. So, but because I have these conversations, I understand these challenges, and this is what makes me, the best representative or candidate to address these challenges, because I am already doing the work of understanding the core, the issues that are going to affect our quality of life, because we're already struggling with mental health. The cases have increased. Emerson does not have the capacity to treat the number of people.
I was going to ask you about that, but you've answered
Right.
the question.
Right.
Certainly the hospital is a lot larger and more comprehensive than when I grew up in Concord in the 1950s, as you know, in the hospital. I think by 1960, I think they might have had 70 or 80 beds total, and they didn't. And of course, the degree of specialization didn't exist back then. They didn't have a separate mental health unit or birthing unit or anything like that. It's totally different.
Yeah.
But I look at Emerson today, and I look at the community and the needs as you've articulated them, and I say, I wonder if they have enough capacity really to deal with everything that should be dealt with.
They are struggling. And as someone, again, who has worked in comprehensive planning, I look at mental health not just as an isolated thing, but how it ties into other sectors. For example, it ties into the work of the police department. If there are domestic violence cases that are arriving out of mental health challenges, then it stretches also the police departments. But they are now also having a staffing shortage as well. So as a legislator, I will be looking at all these issues comprehensively and how they tie into each other, and try to just address them in a catalytic way, so that if we address one thing, it catalytically impacts the other way, addresses the other challenges. And that's, again, experience that I have from having worked in, to look at issues comprehensively.
And folks are interested now when you get elected to the legislature, and most people feel that their taxes are too high, government's too expensive, and so on and so forth. But one concept that I've always tried to be guided by in my political life is that you have a cost of doing something, but then there's the cost of not doing something. So we can do a sewer project in 1965, and it can cost $2 million for the town, and everybody's up in arms. But if you don't do your sewer project, 30 years later, when you have to do it, now it's going to cost $200 million, okay? So maybe you would have been better off spending that money, even though you didn't think you had it, back in '65 to do your sewer project, okay? So why don't you talk a little bit about that and try to give us your perspective on, is that the way you would approach problems in trying to tell maybe your more conservative constituents who are concerned about the cost of things?
Right.
putting it in that kind of a context.
So again, it brings back to some of the best practices I have picked up on in my work as a career of volunteering is the art of functional meetings. So if we're dealing with a problem like a sewer system, obviously I'm not an engineer, but what I would do and what I've done in the past and thrived at is bringing people who are experts in these areas to come and advise on the best course of action. And this is also going to be, and it's good that you mentioned the sewer system because then it ties into the housing as well. Because we want to increase housing, but then it has to be done in a responsible way that it can be supported by the sewer system. And right now, Chelmsford is very overwhelmed. The sewer system is about to collapse.
Chelmsford is served by the Lowell sewage processing plant, and we are near capacity.
Right.
We're at the point now where any development of any size, I think they could probably accommodate a couple of houses being built at this point, but if you're talking about a comprehensive housing project, 400 or 500 units or 200 or 300 units, the answer is no. Those folks, in fact, we've got one going on now at West Campus, 394 units. They have to do an on-site sewage treatment plant,
right?
Because that would exceed our capacity to process. So yeah,
Right. So
the infrastructure is a problem, I think, for all the towns, not just Chelmsford.
So investing in infrastructure is going to be a priority for me. And in addition to sewer, there's transportation. Again, looking at how all the issues tie into each other: housing, sewer, transportation, education. So with transportation, we have the Lowell Transit that serves Chelmsford, but if we could expand on that and make, just strengthen the regional transportation all the way to Acton. Acton has Crosstown Connect, but it has limited routes. So if we could even increase the routes, I want to introduce rideshare programs that go house to house. Chelmsford has one for seniors, but if we
plus we also have the Lowell busing too,
Right.
which the other towns don't have. So,
right.
yeah.
So again, this is an area that we could, have those regional functional meetings like transportation, so that we share the economy. It's like an ecosystem supporting each other. Residents in Acton can shop in Chelmsford easily if there is public transportation. And
what a concept. One of my, and everybody, they're going to get sick. I'm going to say it again for the 50th time in the last 10 years. One of my big beefs in Massachusetts is the way we're organized to deliver local services. We have 351 municipalities. I call them 351 little kingdoms, all doing the same thing. And this is not the approach that other states take. Most states in the country are more regional in their delivery of local services. And it is more cost effective to do it that way. So in what you were just saying is you're interested in taking a look at things on a more regional basis to improve the services and hopefully bring down some of the costs, the administrative costs and so forth that are associated with all these little silos, And that's very interesting to me. I'm very interested in that. So,
thank you. Again, I've been in environments where I have worked on it. I know it works. It just takes the will and the idea. And this is what I keep telling people: creativity and the best ideas don't come. Are not based on where you were born. No. They are based on values and experience, and this is what I'm bringing to this seat. And as a legislator, my priority will be to maximize the use of available resources, and then top that with more resources from the state, be it education. I know Chelmsford is concerned about Chapter 70 and Chapter 90, and I have written, earlier in the campaign, I wrote a proposal to all school committee members, and I proposed that I said that I would propose for the state to increase funding per child to $100, at least for the next 2 years, so that it kind of compensates for the
So
cost.
everybody gets that minimum amount?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that the state can, the school districts can buffer the losses or costs incurred during the pandemic and then get back on track. And then after that, in addition to that, provide adequate transportation for special education, those who really struggle with getting from place to place. And improve, of course, Chapter 90, the transportation costs. Right now, they've passed a budget of $200 million. My proposal would be to, in the coming years, to increase that to $300 million so that it can support our transportation infrastructure.
In the case of Chelmsford, I know, I can't speak to Acton and Concord and Carlisle, but I know in Chelmsford that number has been flatlined for about 12 years now.
Right.
So we've had, inflation every year for 12 years. So I forget what the number was, maybe 2.5 million, I forget. But 2010 dollars is not the same as 2.5 million 2022 dollars. We all know that, right? So yeah, that's very important. So we have a couple minutes left, Vivian. I was going to ask you what your top priority would be, but I think you've kind of answered that already. So I won't go into that. But what do you say to the, very briefly, what do you say to the senior citizen living on a fixed income who's been in his or her home for 30 or 40 years and they're having a problem with the property tax? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking that important question. As someone who lives with my mom, a senior, who is not been earning enough, it's just minimum wage. I feel for our seniors who have lived here even longer and are struggling to make this home because of the high taxes. I have spoken to many of them. One of the ideas that I have is that when we look at the causes of taxation, high taxes, it's because there isn't much, we don't have a bigger, broader tax base because the businesses are failing, the local business that is. So giving incentives to our local businesses so they can thrive and provide the towns, the local governments with a tax base is going to be critical. So I want to invest in that. I have talked to many small businesses and I understand the struggles they're going through and I want to be a partner. And I also want to be a partner with the local government so that we can look at zoning reforms so that, or even just incentives for seniors so that they can thrive, increase affordable housing for seniors, for those who want to downsize.
That's good. So you are, it's good you are aware of the problem, you recognize the difficulty.
Absolutely, I do.
And that's something that you would try to address going forward. And I think that's a good, hopeful message to those of us in the senior citizen category who would like to stay in our homes. And that's a very, very a critical issue for those folks. So Vivian, we've got a little more than a minute left. And as you know, this is a half hour. It goes very, very quickly.
It does.
I almost wish we could spend another half hour. And I'd like to remind people that Vivian is running in the Democratic primary, which will occur on September 6th. So you should have, as a voter, you should have already received an invitation from the Secretary of State to participate in mail-in voting. I think those were mailed out a couple of weeks ago. So you have that option. You can vote by mail prior to September 6th, or if you can do the traditional absentee route, or you can actually go to the polls and vote, okay? So you have those options. There's no excuse for not voting, all right? And if you're not a Democrat, you can pull if you're an unenrolled person, which most people in Mass are, you can choose to take a Democratic ballot and vote there. So Vivian, you've got about 40 seconds. Look into the camera and ask for the vote.
Dear Chelmsford and dear 14th Middlesex District, thank you so much for even getting me on the ballot. I really appreciate it. And I'm here to humbly request for your vote come September 6th. I will work hard for you. I have the experience And yes, I was not born here, but that is a strength as well, because I have loved this community, and I'm going to work hard for it because I know what it means to not feel represented. And I'll do whatever I can to make sure that you have the adequate representation in this community. And I want to partner with you. So if you want to learn more about me, it's vivianbirchall.com. That is the website. Or email me at vivian@vivianbirchall.com, or call me. The phone is on the website. Thank you so much, and thanks to...
And that's a wrap. Thank you very much. Good show.